Hi, this is Latos. I'm the editor-in-chief of Impact Wealth magazine, a publication that specializes in insights for family offices. And today we have Angelo Robles, who is the founder of the Family Office Association, who will tell us a little bit more about everything that you've ever wanted to know about a single family office. Let me introduce Angelo. And give a little background on him. He knows a thing or two about family wealthy offices. He's been working with them since 2008 when he founded the Family Office Association, a global membership organization for ultra high net worth families and their single family offices. His members say that he delivers the finest in content and programming, including his own proprietary content on designing, accelerating, and or transforming single-family offices to thrive generationally. Angelo emphasizes embracing innovation in the single-family office. This includes creating appropriate benchmarks, implementing relevant technology, and updating processes to align with industry best practices. Having worked with multiple generations of families for the past 12 years, and their trusted advisors, Angelo has gained enormous amount of intellectual capital on how ultra high net worth families think and feel and what motivates them. Angelo is the creator of the Family Office Masterclass program series for families, their single family offices, and their advisors. He also personally coaches a select group of global families and advisors. He is a frequent source to top media outlets like Bloomberg News, Wall Street Journal, and Institutional Investor, and maintains a thought leadership series by his podcast, Angelo Robles' Effective Family Office, on iTunes. He has also authored the book, Effective Family Office, Best Practices and Beyond, which is available through Amazon. He is also the co-author of Maximizing Your Single Family Office, Leveraging the Power of Outsourcing and Stress Testing. Without further ado, I have Angelo here.
Hillary. Well, thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be on today. It kind of makes me realize that long bio, my God, I need a short one and I need to make it a little more exciting. What are my hobbies, a little bit about my travel, my dog, my interest in being a foodie, but that will have to wait to a different time.
Of course, but you're very accomplished and you have a wealth of experience that we can't wait to hear more about. So to start, what is and what does a family office do? Can you try to give us a short definition?
Oh, trying to ask me to give a short definition is really tough. I will start with, apparently I'm being really chirpy today. The word experience always scares me a little bit because it does make me feel a little old, but I guess experience and understanding challenges that families would go through and what works and what doesn't work is a good thing. It's just that connotation to age. When you get to be my age and you're so young, you don't have to worry. These are all things that we pontificate about. Your question was a two-part question, and basically this is kind of everything you wanted to know about a single family office. So on a weekend, you have to be working very, very hard. We'll start with the first part of your question. What is a single family office? Well, the dictionary definition, it's a entity created by one family of great success and wealth to internally and exclusively manage their affairs, commonly around the world of finance, but could involve so many different aspects, from checking mail and paying bills to managing household staffing and help around the world to specific services the family may have that are maybe more concierge-based. So it varies. Really, the saying is that if the family has the wealth and resources, it's whatever they want it to be to serve the goals that they have. In terms of what does a single family office do, which is a different than kind of what is a single family office, but they they intertwined. Really it solves problems before they exist. Now that would be the optimum, and relatively few are going to be that. But if you wanted to strive, look at today's world. The wealthy, the very wealthy, have absolutely certain advantages, often earned through entrepreneurship and creating companies and doing many things very positively from a societal perspective. But they have grave challenges, from a cyber attack to things like we're going through right now during COVID-19, if you want to call it a fat tail risk, if you want to say a black swan. And really that gets down to the main point of a single family office. The family is already rich and successful. I'm assuming they want to stay that way generationally. Henceforth, it's protecting their wealth and legacy. It's hedging against risk. It's identifying risks that are out there before anyone else, or the family sometimes even knows it. So a family office acts as a touchstone, a safeguard to the family's wealth and legacy. That would probably be the most broad classic definition in my mind. And I think, again, in repeating, solve problems before they even exist would be a very important aspect of a very high functional, exceptional single family office.
Mm-hmm. And what do they do?
Well, I mean, it's the things that I had a chance to mention. At the heart of it, it's solve problems before they exist, but a little bit more basic and traditionally, the family has some specific goals relative around their money, their legacy, taxation, and how could the single family office help accomplish those goals to the highest capability? Well, you have to look at that in several different ways. Why would the family have a single family office? They're only going to want to have a single family office because it needs to be excellent at what their goals and desires are. Otherwise, just use an advisor, a team of advisors that are unrelated from an entity perspective, a multifamily office, a bank, a private bank. But what you get with a single family office is the ultimate for the ultra successful in privacy, control, and really the big one, customization. Let's use a bank as an example. Every family uses banks. Banks are great. They provide many very, very important services to the ultra wealthy. But let's use an entity that may be a public company. So you have a board of directors that hires a CEO that has a team of executives, and you have people that work there that look to bring in that relationship with the family because it's beneficial and profitable. But at the end of the day, being a public company and a large entity, even $1 billion family is relatively a small relationship for that institution that answers as a public entity ultimately to who? It's the governance standard of the board to answer to the shareholders. And that's going to be all driven by quarterly profits. And that's all of the challenge of potentially relying exclusively on a series of banks versus having your own people 24/7 totally dedicated to you. Now, we're going to get to a lot of the areas pertaining to culture and talent, and that's going to weave all into this. But again, effectively, if I had to even simplify my answer, the single family office is going to do whatever the family requires it to do.
Great. And so would you say that they're more effective than other options? You've mentioned going to a bank for these ultra wealthy families.
You would expect me to say yes, since effectively I'm an organization and a pundit relative to the single family office community. Again, privacy, control, and customization. But, maybe I'll surprise you a little bit. Sometimes no. Sometimes actually the other options that I mentioned, going through a multifamily office, going through an advisor, going through a private bank or banking institution, and then cobbling together relationships, accounting and legal, that sometimes if you're not going to build the family office to be great at the goals that you have and are upcoming, and you want them to hedge risk and you want them to solve problems before they exist, if you're not going to require excellence of that and put the money behind that with the talent that you need, and initially, especially time and resources, and build the right infrastructure, then please do not have a single family office. You're better off not even worrying about that. Just use one bank, two banks, three banks, advisors. I think it'll be a little bit patched together. And I went over already the advantages of a single family office, but not every incredibly wealthy family is really going to be dedicated to building excellence in an institution, an organization like their own single family office.
Mm-hmm. So what would you say would be the first steps to set up a single family office? Would they need a business plan? And what kind of things need to go into that business plan?
Yes. I mean, effectively, that would be accurate. So first you want to do an analysis. What are my options? A bank, a private bank, a multifamily office, or a single family office, but only go down that road for what I said. You incredibly value privacy control and customization. You're willing to build an entity with the right resources and talent that could be world class to you and your family and what those needs are. And if you're scared about these things that are happening out of left field and all these COVID-19 and potentially so much that could go wrong, and you want to protect your wealth and legacy, it's hard for me to imagine that there's going to be anything better than having a single family office, which is why most of the world's billionaires do have a single family office. So you want to identify a comparison to what the options are and understand the time commitment and cost. You want to put together a plan, which effectively is a business plan. What will the family office be of most value to the family? What are some of our goals, at least at the moment? Those could sometimes change, what appears to be every day. What kind of structure are we going to set up? What kind of tax benefits could we get from creating a single family office versus not? Those are all going to be important things. How do we quantify results? Do we have a succession plan? How do we first be effective, like Peter Drucker so eloquently talks about, but how can we be eventually both effective as well as being efficient? So I'm not saying it's easy. It takes time and money. You need to develop the right structures, the right talent. You need to be able to manage up, to have the people be the best that they could be. And you need to be able to have policy and procedures, have standards. So there's a lot that goes into the pre-planning of decision-making to have a family office. And I go again and say, if you're going to have one, do it really, really right, do it great, hold it to a standard of excellence, or just don't have one at all. If you're going to have a mediocre family office, you're going to suffer. You're just better off not having it at all and just using a complete group of outsourced relationships.
And in your books, you've always written about the need for things such as setting standards, policy and procedures. Why is this so important?
Well, I mean, one, you have to quantify the results, and family offices do need to be more rigorous and more institutional. That doesn't lose their personal touch. They're called a family office for a reason, and qualitative is important, but quantitative is also incredibly important. This is a business. I mean, technically, and we'll get to structures in a second, technically, it's a for-profit business, usually. You want to have the best structures and the best people really built around the goals that the family has, which again could change frequently, and that's part of life. You adapt. The single family office should be adaptable. It shouldn't be rigid, but it needs to have a set of processes to outcomes, and do that in reverse. What are the outcomes on the goals that we look to have, and how do we develop processes to get there? And that's going to be built around having processes, having culture, having people that are adaptable, creative, yet also rigorous and dedicated to the task at hand. And I'm a big fan of having the right structures to help support them. And that could include boards and committees and a variety of technology and relationships to make that family office as good as it could be. And you want to have, and that really all comes down to having policy and procedures. So this is not something to do willy-nilly. This is something that requires a significant amount of planning, hiring, getting the right people on the bus, like Jim Collins says, and having a set of proper structures and a framework to go by. If something were to happen to that CEO of the family office, does your family office, other employees are they polymaths? Could they do diverse skills? Do they have a policy and procedures and process to follow where they could get by in the short term? Just like a good sports team that loses a top player, if they're going to lose them over the course of the year, yeah, they're probably going to feel that. But if they lose it for a week or 2 weeks or a month, they might be able to overcome that because of the structure and the concept of team built around their own level of processes and policies and procedures.
Great. And tell us a bit the importance of the processes that a family office should put into their structure.
I mean, that kind of relates to what I just said, and even around governance. It's kind of the glue that holds everything together. Everyone successful in business has heard the term process to outcome. Don't overly focus on the outcome, focus on your process. Now, ironically, you may do the right things in process and to a degree decision making, and still may not be a 10 out of 10 on that specific goal. So there are some that would say, less importance to the process and more importance to what is the outcome, what's the core goal. And again, I do think sometimes that needs to be reversed. But for the most part, I'm going to be a big believer in the structure of having a process of how to get to your outcomes, having leadership, having culture, having policy and procedures. But that does relate a little bit in terms of to governance. And governance is effectively how decisions are made. And that's going to relate to processes, how decisions are made, and what is our game plan, and do we need to adapt that game plan to reach the goals we have as the single family office relative to the goals the family is giving us that we need to be great at.
And what do you think are some of the key goals a family office should have at the top of their list?
I mean, that really relates to what, every family of success is a snowflake. They're all different. What region of the world? What generation? How many family members? Are they still actively growing their wealth? Are they in more wealth preservation mode? Are they philanthropic? So there's so many different perspectives. But like I did say earlier, among the most common is going to be managing the finances, usually around the perspective of hedging risk, especially with things that we're going through with COVID and other black swans that could happen. I don't know any family that wants to take a 40, 50, 60% hit on their assets and resources and have them be over-levered, perhaps in real estate or private companies, or they even have a liquidity issue. So understanding the risk tolerance, even of a multi-billion-dollar family, you want them to be able to sleep at night. So maybe our portfolio is not going to be as high-flying, but we're going to have, 20% in cash. We're going to be hedging certain things. We're not using much leverage. It could be a variety of different factors. Passing on wealth to the next generation, passing on heritage and legacy, concierge services to the family. And those are some things we'll probably get to a little bit later. So those are all things and that's what makes working in a single family office a little bit exciting. It's not the same thing that you're doing even in a given task every day, because the dynamics of the world, let alone the interest and goals of the family, change.
Oh, exactly. And you mentioned concierge services, and that family offices will need to have strong service-centered organizations. Why?
Yeah, like that's it's one of the questions I sometimes get from very talented people that look to work inside a single family office, a tremendous accounting or legal professional. And yeah, there are some family offices that are larger in scale and very structured and rigid. And I'm saying that probably in a negative way. Again, and this is the balance between having processes and policy and standards and policy and procedures, but having wiggle room to adapt to a given situation and not be held to, it's steps 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 5. Sometimes it doesn't work that way. So the big thing in a family office that many smaller family offices, say under 5 people, and someone is whatever you want to call them, the CEO or president, it's not just managing the people around them, hedging the risk of the family, managing the wealth and taxes. It could be anything that's going to be important to them. I would really like my daughter to go to a specific college. Could you help address those issues for me? My grandson is 21 and he's buying a car. Could you walk him through a little bit of the process? Could you help this person teach them about the value of alternative investments? They're in high school, they're not learning anything there. What could you do to help educate them on that? A family friend is staying over. Now they're caught up in COVID-19. They don't want to leave the country or can't get out, but they might have a health insurance issue. Now, again, this is both good and bad. There are some people that will say, well, different things happen. I get a chance to work on my skills and my creative process to solve problems. Again, I go back to what I said, solving problems. So sometimes it's not as linear as all I do is I'm the CEO and I co-manage the investment portfolio. And sometimes it is. But oftentimes, it will be a more polymath, a diverse skill set that's going to be of service to the family. And some of the largest single-family offices I know, where the principals have tens and tens of billions of dollars, so we're talking Forbes 30, sometimes the people that lead those family offices would be someone that has a degree in hotel management from Cornell, like an iconic school for service and hotel management, where they're going to outsource some of the investing, taxes, and legal work, but they're going to need to be hands-on with the family 24/7 on request that could come in frequently every day and could be anything. It could be all over the place, and that person is going to have to be excellent at customer service. If you don't believe in being superior, being great in customer service, and you don't enjoy potentially that there may be some diversification of what you do based on what you were hired on, then in many cases, maybe a single family office would really not be for that person looking to work there.
Yeah, that makes sense. So walk me through the structure in creating a single family office.
Well, we're probably going to put the audience a little bit to sleep, and I'm not a legal or tax professional, and it does vary from country to what various perspectives are. And there is no one formula, by the way. But in the US, there's a little bit of a framework. And that framework partially came from the IRS taking the lender family to court relative to certain deductions they were getting in their family office that the IRS challenged. And I believe that came to fruition in December of 2017, and the lender family won. There are cases, there hasn't been much history, but the history has leaned more towards the IRS and government relative to certain family office structures and tax deductibility. So what this does, although it's only applicable to the lender family, it creates a framework of what worked for them and may work for others, and not a bad framework for others around the world to consider. So what would that look like? The single family office is effectively, again, it's an entity. It may be a C Corp, an S Corp, an LLC, and I'm talking more maybe US-centric language here. You're going to want to get the advice of people that are 24/7 as legal professionals dedicated to the single family office community to really understand some of the nuances and do the best job for you in doing this. So the single family office is a management company. It's an entity. Let's call it an LLC. Theoretically, like the lender family, it's technically for profit. Now, we're not going to get into, well, what owns the LLC? Is it a revocable trust, an irrevocable trust? Is it a person or persons? Is it a family limited partnership? That gets a little complicated. It could be any one of a combination of that would make it a very complex legal discussion, which is not the purpose of our dialogue, but I wanted to set that framework. So you have the SFO, the single family office management company here. Now, the family owns assets. The assets, let's say they're here, are owned by various partnership interests, LLCs. So what a family may do, I said may do, is they may set up the management company in a state that's going to be favorable from a privacy and taxation perspective. Let's say Delaware, Alaska, Wyoming, Nevada. And the assets are going to be held by various other entities and probably in a different state, but a state that would also be good on privacy and taxation. So if you pick the entity being in Nevada, but the structure of the investments being in Delaware, fine. So then the investments over here, the person that's either the trustee or the structure of the ownership hires that family office to do legitimate work. Setting the investment policy statement for the family, asset allocation, managing execution. It might even be more of an outsourced single family office where they're not even directly executing investments. They're picking best in breed third-party managers, and that should be fine. So there are services that that family office entity does that is much deeper than simply investing, that needs to be intertwined with the assets. So you have the single family office management company here, you have the assets here, and you have intertwining agreements between them. Again, technically in the lender versus IRS, the single family office management company is a for-profit entity. Now there's complexities, like I did hint at, relative to what structures it should be under and what ownership entities, revocable trust and other options that might be available. But that helps to create the framework, the structural issues of having a family office. Now that begs the next question, why is that important? Well, per what I described at lender versus the IRS, getting many personal tax deductions, actually December of 2017, that same month, we lost a lot of capability relative to certain deductions being pulled from American citizens that made it harder for individuals of great wealth and success to get certain deductions that historically they might have gotten partially in the past. But having the for-profit entity of the single family office, a legitimate company, intertwined with the assets and different entities, and again, intertwining agreements, creates a real business relationship that creates the potential for various tax benefits that the individual would not be able to get on their own. So in theory, the single family office potentially is beneficial from a tax perspective, comparative to not having that at all and having disparate relationships with different providers, but not having the proper structures created as a single family office. Hillary, I think we probably confused about everyone who's listening in. This is something that you do not want to do on your own. There's, a couple of dozen of really talented attorneys that are deeply experienced in the family office space that can help. I recommend that you probably meet and interview with a couple of them, and they're all going to have a little different twist to what I said. Some have a completely different model that looks a little bit more, and I didn't even get into carried interest, that plays into what I just described, but there are some that look even more hardcore, a little bit like a private equity structure and how they intertwine with carried interest. Again, I don't want to go on that subject, but I do think it was important to understand this is not something that you just create out of thin air. This is not something that you do as a DBA. You have to do it right. And if you don't do it right, you're not getting the benefits, you're possibly breaking some laws and guidelines, and you're not potentially going to get the tax benefits you would get by doing it correctly.
Yes, exactly. So what do you think is the best approach for governance?
Well, that relates a little bit to some of the topics that we spoke about earlier, but governance is very important. When you're setting up the structure of the family office, governance basically is how decisions are made. So again, having that, how are decisions made? What's our process? What's the goals of the family, the process to the outcome? What's our game plan in terms of reaching those goals, and what are our policy and procedures? I go back to that a lot, and I don't mean to make it sound like it's so rigid. Again, it does need to be adaptable, and things change and should change. But you want to have some level of structure. Otherwise, again, it's much harder to quantifiable relative to those goals of the family. You can't improve what you can't measure. And the more opportunities you have for greater metrics and measurement, the better opportunity it is for the family to understand the value that they're getting and for the executives to improve upon what they do within the single family office. But I'll answer your question also from a little different perspective. As the family is creating an SFO, there's multiple ways to go about that, kind of how decisions are made in governance. Do we create a board of 3 or 5 people, maybe even some outside the family? And for the big picture items, yeah, we hire the CEO and their job is to execute on the goals. But do we need to reach a consensus where we all agree, all 3 or all 5? Is it just majority? Or is it as I remember on an investment committee, Warren Buffett once saying, oh, I do like an odd number, and it's less than 3. Meaning 1, just him. And that is going to be the cleanest model, where it's one person, arguably the wealth creator, that created the wealth, that listens to other aspects of the family, develops committees and advisory boards of younger generations that are getting weaned in the legacy of the family and the experiences to one day perhaps take over that role or maybe change the dynamic of it. But a lot of the older entrepreneurial type A types, they like to hang on to that sometimes as long as they could. So they take a little more of that Warren Buffett approach that, yeah, we're going to have committees and boards, but effectively I'm the sole decision maker. And that's not necessarily wrong. It's the cleanest model. But again, you need to decide on this before setting up the structures. I mean, of course you could always adapt it. And it's very important to have a board, even if it's not a end-all controlling board where 3 out of 5 or 5 out of the 5 or however it's set up that way. But you still want to have, you don't want to get too insular. You don't want to, everyone has blind spots. And the opportunity of having those outside the family that are trusted, that are talented, and don't have any axe to grind from a financial perspective. They're not one of the providers the family is going to be allowed to use anyway. You want to keep that incredibly independent. And that relates a little bit as well to external audits, which we'll probably get to, and the importance of that. So there is no one right governance plan. Again, every family is a snowflake. Do you have one person who completely controls it? Do you have consensus? Do you have 7 people? You need majority. You need 4 out of 7 to vote on the bigger picture items. What family members could then interact with the family office? Is it better going through a liaison? Is it a chief of staff inside the family office so the others are not too distracted? There is no one right formula that makes it both exciting because it's different, but it makes it a little bit challenging sometimes too.
Have to consider when comprising their boards and committees?
Well, I mean, it's kind of some of the things that I noted, at least on the board part. Again, is it one person that controls everything? And that's fine. Is it more of a majority or a consensus? Are board positions good for what? 6 months, a year, 3 years? Oh, who decides if you don't have, again, processes in place as to how that's going to work? And who's coming up in the family? So is it a son or daughter? Is it a grandchild? And who's going to be moving up the chain to help make some decisions? Or what happens with many families is, especially maybe brothers or brother and sisters that create an entity and sell it, they make a lot of money. Maybe they're better off to simply going in their own direction. Some may do a single family office, some might not. Some may combine forces, but others may elect to, they just go their own way. Now, you lose a little bit of the power of family, the business enterprise that made them come together, that made them row together. That kind of fractionates that, so that's a negative, but that just may be realistically what's going to be better for some families. When it comes to committees, You probably want to have things like an audit committee, perhaps a tax committee, almost certainly an investment committee, and for larger scale family offices, perhaps a comp committee relative to compensation inside the family office. Do these committees have authority? That depends. Usually they don't, but the key person in the family office that aligns with the investment committee, that would be the CIO. On an audit committee, that can mean the CFO. They have a seat at the table. And again, this comes down to governance. How are decisions made? Do we only make important financial decisions if there's majority or consensus, or does one person make that decision? But in general, you do want to involve the family. I would recommend that for both the family office executive to encourage that, but for the family as well, that there needs to be something better, and which is why most family offices have horrific succession plans. The matriarch or patriarch dies, the family doesn't feel an engagement in the process. They look at the family office as dated, as not as effective as they would like. They don't even really know it that well. It's technology behind the times, or I'm making that assumption, and they disband it. Most family offices don't last beyond 10, 15, 20 years. So that's a big problem. Engaging the next generation, having proper boards and committees and those outside the family as participants are all proper governance of being more rigorous and institutional that could lead to a better result in the family office and more sustainability for the entity over time with the family.
And what kind of talent do you think they should recruit from outside the family?
Well, I mean, that's a whole other subject, almost asking, should the family members themselves work inside the family office? That's a complicated one. Sometimes yes, often no. You don't want to have nepotism. You want to have people start at the bottom and, so to speak, to work their way up in terms of their capability. So the other aspect of your question is relative to outside people that are hired. Just like you build a company, you hire perhaps whatever, or someone works into a CEO or president. You want to hire someone who's a leader, who's empathetic, a good listener, can manage people, has an even hand, and is aligned with the interests of the family in terms of what their goals are. Is it mitigating risk? Is it being more service-centric? Whatever that quote-unquote might be. Usually the first person to head up a newer single-family office is going to be someone the matriarch or patriarch has a relationship with. It may be an investment professional, probably most commonly a tax or a legal professional. And you want to have trust. That's incredibly important. So there's nothing wrong with following that process. But is that person going to be great at hiring others, at managing them up, and at leading what could be a growing enterprise? Perhaps not. And a challenge that families have is probably not compensating that top person as much as they should. You'll probably also in time want to go through a recruiter that you're very aligned with, that understands the value that the family office brings to the family, and you need to bring in, I mean, what's more important than people? Jim Collins, get the right people on the bus. People, processes, and machines. Those are tech. That's probably the big three. So you need to get the people part of it right. And it's very, very hard to do. Do you believe in certain psychological testing? How does that play? How many people do you interview? Do you use a recruiter? All this takes time and it takes money. But again, if you're not looking to be excellent in the single family office, then why even have a single family office at all? You need to do it correctly, and that does take time and money. And I don't know if anything, you could argue broadly processes, policy, and procedures, but I don't know if anything is really going to be as important as people. This is still a people business. It's the quality of the talent you have and how they work together as a team, fulfilling the goals of the family, and again, staying ahead of the curve, stopping problems before they happen, being creative on mitigating and managing risk. Those are all going to be traits that are going to be important to the concept of the people and the team that you have inside the single family office.
Yeah, so let's talk a little bit more about the importance of external audits, checks, and balances?
Sure. I mean, that's important from a variety of perspectives. We hinted at it with potentially being on an advisory board or a committee. It would be a little conflicting if everyone was only with the single family office or the family. You want to have an outside set of eyes for a variety of reasons. Again, everyone, we all, you and I, we all have blind spots. So having people that could come in and be an auditing committee from a tax perspective, from how distributions are made to investing, to just the structures. It doesn't mean that they're replacing anyone. It doesn't mean that what you're doing now is not good, but perhaps it could be a little better. So having proper structures on boards and committee and having the right auditing. Now, it's also important from another perspective. Family offices are they're very insular. And they're small, and there are times when the family drops the ball a little bit, maybe has the wrong person or people inside the SFO, or maybe something happens, maybe someone's blackmailed. How do you know that there's not some fraud occurring in the family office? If you're able to have everyone on the same page, we're a professional organization, you're getting paid above average, and we need to sometimes have a second set of eye on things. So having exactly what was noted, an auditing committee, or having people to check on policy and procedures to make sure there's standards that are being followed and that they're held to a certain rigor, that needs to be done. The family office needs to be under the microscope in a good way, and that's only fair from the family's perspective. And again, it benefits in the long run the single family office to enhance and improve what they're doing to be best in breed. And this all comes back to, among the most important phrases that I haven't mentioned yet, best practices. This comes down to, this is what the gigantic top 20 single family offices around the world are doing. They have policy and procedures, processes and structures. They pay their people tremendously at the top of that quote-unquote food chain for a family office, and they hold it to a rigorous and a high standard. It creates an opportunity for the executive to legitimately have a career in this community. And again, you want to have the standards that I mentioned.
And whose responsibility exactly is it for the family office to succeed?
Well, I may surprise you with my answer. At the end of the day, all of the responsibility rests on the family. It's up to the person who created the family office, the family members that are active in it, and broadly the family as a whole. If your family office is poor or mediocre, that's on you. And you probably shouldn't even have a family office, so you should look to rectify that as soon as possible. So don't, people are going to care about themselves. During COVID-19, you may have an executive that is going to be just simply more focused on some of their own personal challenges. So understanding and being empathetic to that, of course, is going to be important. But the family has to realize, hey, I should also know, what do we own? How do we own it? What access do I have to it? Do I know how to balance a checkbook? Do I know how to do things where, oh, God forbid, the family office were to somehow need to be, out for a little while, or it needs family members to step in and help with some of the services. At the end of the day, the buck stops with the family. If they want to have a great single family office, they have processes, policy and procedures, they have goals that are articulated, they pay great people the proper compensation, they help to monitor and manage that process. And if that family office is not successful, I'm sorry, a good part of that is on them. They need to hold the family office to a very, very high bar.
And are the people the most important aspect of a successful family office?
Yeah, I kind of mentioned that earlier. You can maybe argue for structural processes, but I'm going to say people, processes, and tech and machines. So that's kind of like a 1, 2, 3. Again, it goes to Jim Collins. It goes to the work that we keep on talking about, and the research that I do. It keeps on coming back to people, people, people. You want to get the right people on the bus, and sometimes that means They're not the most technically proficient. I don't want to go on a tangent, but you want to have people that have tremendous ethics, a great work ethic, are absolutely competent, and hopefully in the top half of what they do, but they also need to work in the concept of a team, in the structure of usually a small office that's a single family office. If you're going to bring someone in who's a type a rising star, or whatever they might be, but they come from a big entity that had a lot of resources, they got a big ego, they may not work well in the small confines of a quote-unquote single-family office. You're better off hiring them by outsourcing them at their banking, legal, accounting, or technology company. They have a greater breadth of resources available to them. They're getting more experiences with other families, and you're going to stifle them too much, and they're not going to be a good fit inside your single-family office anyway. So part of it is quantitative with measurement. Part of it is qualitative. It's, art and skill here. So there's no one correct answer, but yeah, you're not going to have a good single family office if you don't have the right people on the bus. People are the most important aspect of it.
And as far as leadership and managing your employees, is this any different in a family office than another corporation?
No, if anything, it might be more important because it's usually a smaller entity. So the opportunity of the family to instill a sense of leadership and clarity on their goals. And again, as I said earlier, the family office needs to understand, it's important to quantify, as I said, measurables to help show the success and results against given goals. But sometimes it comes down to how the family feels about you. So that is qualitative, which is why it's quantitative and it's qualitative. It's kind of a combination of the two. A concern that some family offices have earlier on is, again, they hire someone who's trustworthy, who's a talented person, a good person, but they may not be the right person in terms of hiring others and creating a career track, managing them up. And sometimes you don't know that until you actually do it. Although, again, the more you measure things, the more you could have clarity in terms of what works and what doesn't work. But yes, leadership, the ability to motivate, to inspire others, to hold yourself to a high standard, to increase the productivity, a word that I do like. How does that family office become more not only effective and efficient, but productive? And leadership and the traits around productivity and getting the best out of people, again, sometimes that's more art than science.
And how should the productivity be taught to employees? Should you instill the 80-20 principles and the like?
I believe so. There's certain principles. The 80-20 rule, Richard Koch wrote about it. Pareto, I think. I'm going to mess up a little bit of my history. But, 20% of your efforts result in, 80% of the successes that you have. So understanding, again, this comes down to quantifying what works, what doesn't work, having a beginner's mindset, having no ego, and realizing that we all have blind spots, and having the resources and mentorship. That's also a key word that many family offices lack. So the ability of perhaps 80-20, but there's the Eisenhower box, there's the Pomodoro technique where, again, it may be better off working in blocks of 50 minutes than take a 10-minute break, whether it's breathing techniques or meditation. You probably didn't expect I was going to get into that. But these are all things that in today's world we're learning by quantifying what works and what doesn't work. And part of it varies depending on the culture of the family office, and the people that you have internal. But all of that is incredibly valuable and important. It needs to be productive, and you need to get the best out of your people.
And you mentioned culture. What is that exactly, and why is it important?
It's different things to different people. It's very important. It does vary a bit between the family's culture and technically the culture of the single family office, which is aligned and answers to the family, but in theory has its own culture. A culture could be our behaviors, in our actions, perhaps the expectations of certain standards that's relative to the culture that we have inside a family office. Now, this brings up another series of challenges as well. If everyone in the family office is about the same age, the same perhaps sex, the same college education, you may get a little bit of groupthink. So having diversity in culture from different ages, age brings, I hope, wisdom and leadership, but youth may bring a certain creativity and technological capability. And that helps they both are different, they learn from each other, but they help add to the value and benefit of the enterprise. So it's a difficult one. And again, the more I try to make things sometimes quantifiable, the more sometimes it is evenly balanced by qualitative as well, in terms of what is defined by successful leadership and culture and setting standards without being overly rigorous. But these are things that need to be thought about, that a leader should have the capability of understanding. And sometimes outside talent and people need to come in to help shake things up relative to leadership and culture. And the leader of the family office should always have a humble beginner's mindset. They shouldn't know everything. They should be willing to learn new things. The world is changing every day. If you have the same mindset that you had a year or 10 years ago, I mean, you may want to keep on to certain processes and experiences that you have that have worked, but that doesn't mean they're going to work moving forward. Needing to adapt and change is something that the world is going through literally right now. And, this is part of being in today's society. Family offices need to be more adaptable.
And how should the creator family engage with the whole family? Should they? And how do they interact with them?
That relates a little bit to what I answered earlier on boards and committees. It varies. Sometimes it's one person that's the total in power. Sometimes it's set up more as a formal board. It could be majority consensus, whatever's needed on certain votes of key items. It's easiest if it's one person that's, the controlling hammer, but that probably is not going to be the best teaching apparatus for younger generations coming up, as well as perhaps be challenging for a succession within the family and the family office as well. So, again, like many things in the family office world, which frustrates many, there is no one clear set of answers. It depends. And you need to get clarity and communication with the family and the family office to have the best balance, like I said, of quantitative and qualitative.
And in the end, is communication key?
Yes. It's like between the family themselves, absolutely. The family and the single family office, yes. And that's the ability to impart bad news as well. Not everything the single family office does is going to be a 9.9 out of 10. It'd be nice. They may strive for that, but you need to have the confidence and relationship with the conduit or conduits from the family to also impart bad news, or to have disagreement that, I disagree with you on this. This is not just the status quo, or don't do this, but sometimes rocking the boat and challenging certain assumptions is a good thing. And that absolutely implies within the family office as well. There needs to be an open communication channel. There needs to be methods of communicating, and people learn differently, just like with a football or a soccer coach. Some coaches succeed being very cerebral and very thoughtful, eloquent, and some are a little bit more fiery, and that works better for certain personalities. So that's not too different inside the family or the single family office. I think it was Dennis Jaffe, the wonderful PhD and researcher globally for like 100-year-old family enterprises and much more, basically summed up his latest book as saying it kind of comes down to communication. Having respect for the other, being an active listener, and the ability to communicate, to articulate yourself is incredibly important, and probably not taught well enough in school, I might add.
Mm-hmm. Yep, definitely. And you've written a lot about trends in the family office industry, and What are some of the biggest ones you've been witnessing, and such as the virtual family office?
Yeah, I mean, I could go on and on. So, and I know we have some more questions to go. So maybe I'll just focus on the virtual family office. So, what is a virtual single family office? It's still a single family office. It has the family office. It has the proper structures that we spoke about earlier, and some of the intertwining needs, more so, of culture, of leadership, of standards and policy and procedures. But the old days of, oh, you need to have $500 million or $1 billion to have a family office, well, that's not necessarily true. I'm not saying I agree, but I think there are people, well, I don't think, I know, people that I know that think technically a virtual family office could even be at someone at 20 or 30 million. I think that's a little bit light in my opinion, but theoretically it's possible. So basically, what is a virtual single family office? It is a single family office, and practically all, not even factoring in COVID-19 times, practically all single family offices are incorporating more and more of being a virtual, but some are becoming very hardcore, especially now being virtual. And that really is on two items. It's outsourcing more. Hey, we can't be great at everything, or the family doesn't want to have a staff of 50, 60, or 70 in a family office. So why don't we have a leaner family office, do more with less? Why don't we identify true experts in certain things that we need to outsource from the family office? Oh, and why don't we use technology more? Now, here's some irony. Almost everyone's afraid of change. I was listening to a podcast today where they're saying when elevators came out, that was a change and people were dying. And then Otis Elevator developed that certain mechanism where the rope or the steel cable, even if it did break, there was a mechanism to stop it. And then there were operators of the elevator, and then they got rid of them and it became mechanical. And all these things were scary to people. We look at it now as saying, what are you talking about? It's like this natural, we don't even think about it. But when something is new, it becomes dynamic and changes. So here's what COVID-19 did. A lot of the executives, especially those probably 40, 45 and older, they knew the family office probably needed to get more technically proficient, but they kept on putting it off. And now it's forced upon them. And here's what many of them are realizing. It's not so bad. Relative to, okay, communication, we have phones, we have Microsoft Teams and Slack for communication, which now they're getting used to using, project management, CRM, Zoom, and it's forcing them to realize they're more talented than they thought. It's not as hard as they thought, and this does help become leaner in theory, which I know has other drawbacks, but more effective and more efficient. So the future for sure is leaner, but even more effective single family offices and basically being more virtual. That doesn't mean that you do not have an entity for tax benefits and others that's a single family office, and it does not mean you don't have employees, although theoretically you could, maybe just the family, but it means it's probably a leaner staff that does strategic outsourcing, does more with less, and is very technology proficient. I mean, I gave the basics of technology, which again is not really that hard. And many of us are forced to do it now during the COVID-19 period. But there's other benefits of technology, and that's greatly enhancing, literally as we're talking, with the wonderful entrepreneurs we have around the world and what they're doing in technology, augmented reality, and AI. We're going to have this conversation in 2 or 3 years, and again, it may look completely different relative to post-COVID-19 and what's happening in AI and augmented reality. It's going to, I think, be very intriguing. We'll find out.
So do you think by working remotely, people are becoming more efficient? What are some of the external audits are there to verify this efficiency?
Well, I mean, right now during COVID-19, for many in kind of somewhat quarantine, it really has only been 5 or 6 weeks. So they were forced. Now, much of what we do is not on a hard drive in a computer. It's in the cloud. So yeah, you could be remote. Most of us have Wi-Fi. Zoom is easy to use. And even though they might have been afraid of Microsoft Teams or Slack, they realize it's actually easy and absolutely could be more efficient. So first is being effective. Be just damn great at what you do. But ultimately, you want to be incredibly effective, yet also efficient. And these are principles that Peter Drucker and many other amazing thought leaders have discussed and spoken about over time. Also, help those that need more help on becoming more remote in today's world. Walk them through it, allow them the opportunity to learn. And in today's world, with YouTube videos and so much information out there, it's easier than ever. And I'm generally being impressed by what people are doing that were a little nervous about technology. They're picking it up better than I thought. And I actually think, again, there's some interesting takeaways via COVID-19 and the future of a more virtual remote single-family office.
And what else do you think COVID-19 has taught us? You write about stress testing, fire drills, tabletop exercises.
Ooh, you're getting all my good stuff. Some of it I didn't even go to the market yet, so you're getting my first things, Hillary. Yes. So again, the family's already really, really rich. I think they want to stay that way. So hedging and mitigating risk to them, especially risk that could be devastating, that would be, truly incredibly impactful, that could hurt the family legacy or from a financial perspective. So one of the things that we do, it's known in the consultative community as a tabletop exercise. And that's an opportunity, usually engaged by the family, to work in coordination with them in the single family office to help them identify blind spots, to go from good to great, from great to exceptional, from exceptional to extraordinary, to enhance policy and procedures and processes. Now, there's various ways to do this, but I don't know if there's a better way than the tabletop exercise and let's use COVID-19 as an example. This would be an example of one. Imagine principal in their 70s, relatively small type family unit, has a single family office, gets COVID-19. It gets real bad, real fast, goes to the hospital, daughter is with them, needs to go on a ventilator. They're going to be out, and in theory, probably won't be back. The daughter gets durable power of attorney and now is in charge of decision making. Goes into the family office. Oh, here's what happened. It happened really quick in a 24-hour window. Is that single family office prepared? Do they have a relationship with the daughter and family already? They should, and they should push the principal to be a little more proactive in having a generational relationship with the family. Does he or she understand the value that the single family office brings to the table? But some of the things that daughter, in my example, who's a millennial, a little older at, 34, but probably has a different perspective about communication, perhaps on investing in philanthropy than maybe what dad had, and maybe relative to the age and people inside the single family office. But back to what could be a core challenge. Imagine she now goes, where's the do not resuscitate? Where's the latest will? When was the latest estate plan done? What exactly do we really own with all these different alternative investments in real estate? And you'll often find that practically all single family offices could get better. It doesn't mean that it may not be adequate or good. It simply means they could get better. And there's nothing wrong with that. It needs a second set of eyes. We all have blind spots. We all get a little status quo in the siloed little community of the single family office that is often too private, too cocooned, and doesn't have enough external thoughts and people. And I'm a little afraid of the word experts, although sometimes experts are valuable. You also want to have people that maybe don't know that much about the single family office, that are maybe weaned in Stanford University design principles of brainstorming and creative thinking. And you want to have different type of people that may come in and say, hey, let's do this exercise. It's called a tabletop exercise. And COVID-19 is teaching us this is very important. Oh, and by the way, it could be done virtually on Zoom with multiple participants, 2 or 3 family participants, and I'm making this up, 4 or 5 executives in the family office, and you get results that are relatively immediate because the family articulated what are some of their gravest fears and concerns. I'm a huge basketball fan, so it grieves me to bring this up, but Kobe Bryant, I mean, that's not planned for. The helicopter goes down and boom, it's over. It's devastating. It was a horrific loss in multiple different perspectives. Would a single family office really be prepared for that? For all the reasons that I noted. Was the life insurance in order? The will, the estate plan, the finances, the relationship with the next gen? And this exercise over a half-day period uncovers areas that could be enhanced. It doesn't mean they're not good already. It just means they could likely be enhanced. And the second part of it is helping them with, storage and retrieval of documentation, of processes, of standards, of policy and procedures, of enhancements to technology, what happens with a cyber attack. I mean, there's a million different variables of things that could be devastating to a family. I brought up only really a couple of them. And planning to mitigate risk is incredibly important. I am going to read something, Hillary, if you don't mind. I came across it this morning, and I think it's going to help to drive home the point. Many people are familiar with the great philosopher Seneca. If not, shame on you. You should be, and read his stuff immediately. This is kind of a quote from a wonderful book by Ryan Holiday called Stillness is the Key. This is why Seneca said that nothing happens to the wise man contrary to his expectation, because the wise man has considered every possibility, even the cruel and the heartbreaking. He goes on to give a deeper example of Seneca talking about, I guess back in those days, a boxer and having the ability of knowing what it's like to get hit and being prepared for that so it's not a shock the first time it happens. The author also gives an example of, taking a trip, go over things that could go wrong or that could prevent the trip from happening. A storm, the captain falls ill, the ship is attacked by pirates. I mean, some of the things are, again, a little out of left field, but if you're able to think about mitigating risk, as that's the most important value you're likely providing to the family, and you're able to have the right outside resources like a tabletop exercise that I noted, you're able to think these things through. This is not a I got you exercise with a single family office executive. And if the single family office executive is that closed-minded and that protective of their status quo, then they don't have a beginner's mindset. They don't want to get better. And again, we're all afraid of the new. I gave the example with the elevator, and that was shocking to people. Birthday parties, Hillary, birthday parties were actually, there's articles and papers about, oh my God, what is this? We have to go get gifts in stores. This is shocking. Anything that changes what we're used to as a routine, even me, I don't want to make it sound like I'm some kind of Mr. Creativity and perfect, but all these things are important and matter. Now, coming into a tabletop, I think the family and the people leading it need to be sensitive and respectful of the executives in the family office and need for them to understand the value, and we all have blind spots. Let's enhance. We're not saying that you're not good or great, but we could all get better. And having different people look at the problem that have different mindsets and experience and help provide guidance to help better how you're servicing the family. Not only is it great to the family, and in theory that should only matter because the family office serves the family, but the executive in the family office is getting an education, is learning perhaps some new things and principles that are better for them, not just in service to the family, but in their knowledge and their career.
So how do single family offices handle the investments of the family?
All differently. If I had to simplify it, There's some that are more direct investors and some that are more allocators. And there's no right or wrong answer. Most family offices do a combination of both, probably skewing somewhat to being more of an allocator. So being a direct investor basically means that you build an internal team. Yeah, that takes time and money and managing them up. But in theory, you're a direct investor, whether real estate, public securities, depending on the people in the team that you have. That could be laborious, that could be expensive. Yeah, you're able to control the cost more, it's more transparent, and it may very well be the better option, but it depends. Usually more to a much larger family that is willing to put the time, effort, and resources into building more of a direct investment focus of the family office. Every family office should work on the investment policy statement, the asset allocation, and a family that is allocating kind of picks best in breed managers. So part of the investment policy statement via the asset allocation is that we need to check this box on whatever, long short manager, long only equity, real estate. Why don't we work, whether it's with consultants or with the internal team that we have, dedicated to finding the best of the best? How do we do diligence? Understanding past return is no guarantee of the future, so it's not just strictly based on past return. I actually think that picking managers and managing that process and probably adjusting the managers every year, that's an alpha skill in its own right. It probably gets underrated as a skill set relative to hardcore direct investors. But nonetheless, again, sometimes one or the other fully wins out, but usually it's more of a combination of the two, with most sub-billion-dollar families being more allocators and many multi-billion-dollar families sometimes leaning more to being direct investors.
That makes sense. And how important to families and their family offices is impact investing?
It's getting more and more important, and some of the reasons that I mentioned earlier. One, it is going to sometimes come down to returns. And very simply, there's good opportunity in impact investing that creates an attractiveness from an investing perspective from the return profile. When you couple in the importance to family of certain things, it could be climate change, it could be equality in the workforce, it could be a variety of different things. Yes, you do have some families that are going to be more thoughtful in impact investing, sometimes combined with their personal beliefs in philanthropy, and a little stereotypical, but somewhat true. As the younger generation begins to become in more a position of authority inside the single family office, they usually are going to have some different beliefs and philosophies than the older generation, and they may and have pushed more for that the value of the wealth that we created be impactful to the world moving forward. And not just that the wealth was created, we pay taxes, all valuable things and true. But again, it's important for the single family office to understand who has influence in the family and the decision making. Is it transitioning more to the next generation? Is the principal in their 80s and that's going to be inevitable anyway? So being a good listener, being an active listener, a single family office being empathetic to the needs of the younger generation, and perhaps working with them to sometimes convince the older generation of the value in being more purposeful and impactful. It's a trend that is not going to go away. It's accelerating, and I think that's a good thing.
And what are some of the important goals for the single-family office as far as mitigating risk to the family?
I mean, those are issues that I think I probably pounded pretty extensively earlier, and that the family is already rich. They likely want to, and it's not just because they want to be a miser and have wealth for generations and generations, but they earn that money the hard way, often through entrepreneurship, through taking risks, and they simply want the use of that capital or the decisions of the generations that follow. Whether it's giving it all to philanthropy, that's fine. But they don't want something to just happen out of left field. I mean, we mentioned things like a terrorism or cyber attack or a collapse of the banking market of COVID-19, we didn't even think about, don't have to really, I don't think, worry about this here in the US, but in other countries, there's concern about government confiscation. Now, that does happen in the US through taxation. So taxes could go up, and likely with our gigantic deficit, they will. So that's a form of confiscation of assets and resources. But in other countries, that could be more extreme, sometimes literally by force or military. So these are grave concerns to a family. So managing those risks. For the family office, like I said over and over, we want to solve problems before they even happen or appear on the radar screen. Or at least we want to have, we thought about it, we identified what some potential mitigation strategies or solutions could be, and that puts you in a better position than not having planned for that at all. I know that those listening in or watching in are probably going to very much feel like, wow, you're really big on protecting the wealth and legacy and mitigating risk, because there's really bad things that could happen and go wrong. And again, the family's already super rich. They likely want to remain that way generationally, like I said, and you want to protect them from things that could be utterly devastating to them, and having an understanding of what that could be. And this goes back to what I mentioned about the tabletop exercise, about thinking things through from a policy and procedures, of processes. In the military, they may call that war games. And, we call it, it's important to stress test the family office and to play out what if scenarios. What if this happens? What if that happens? And again, you're not looking to catch the executive off guard. We're looking to work together to find the best solutions to enhance the capability of the family office and their service to the family.
And what do you recommend offshore entities for asset protection?
It's probably more of it's a better question for legal folks. I don't recommend really anything like that. I'm not a legal or a tax advisor or an investments. I run a membership organization dedicated to incredibly successful families and their family offices. But do I hear things? Of course. So yes, mitigating risk and passing on wealth to the next generation involves perhaps a combination of estate, tax, and asset protection planning. Now, I'm going to be somewhat more familiar with the rules here in the U.S., which are onerous from a tax perspective, and how the IRS will follow you around the world unless you denounce your citizenship. Not enough time to go into that kind of dialogue. But yes, there are families in the U.S. that will have offshore trust, not from a tax perspective, because again, there probably is going to be none, but from a privacy and to make it more difficult for a party looking to get access to their money, to make it much more difficult. So Nevis, the Cook Islands, many different entities may put the burden of proof on the party bringing the claim. Maybe it's a divorcing spouse, maybe it's a creditor issue. And the whole issue of fraudulent conveyance in the US, probably in many states, could go 7 or 10 years, where in other countries it may be much, much less. So families that are concerned about mitigating risk and passing on wealth to whoever they wanted to, family, non-family, philanthropic initiatives, whatever, are going to be protective of the effort and time and risk the family took to create that kind of wealth. So henceforth, managing those risks, including some that I noted, divorce, lawsuits, a whole bunch of different things. Those are just two examples. It may make some sense for the recommendation of your professional team, mainly your attorney or attorneys in the case of a really big family, to consider your options, and possibly for U.S. families, some resources and structuring offshore could make sense.
Yeah, that makes sense to protect everything that they've worked for. And I read that what you wrote on families thriving in crisis, and how you can create a dream team for them. What did you mean by that?
Well, I did say earlier I was a basketball fan, so the dream team concept comes from the '92 Olympics in Barcelona, with the U.S. basketball team and Michael Jordan, Magic Johnson, of course, all that. And that moniker really has stuck even with other dream teams, mainly in basketball, but really in many different facets. So again, this goes back to challenges that happen, mitigating risk. We didn't have the time to get into, could you actually flip risk? Meaning a little bit like the work of Nicholas Nassim Taleb, could you become anti-fragile, where you actually sometimes become stronger under duress or with challenges that are happening because you have certain mechanisms to protect, you have hedging or cash, whatever it might be. So one thing that we worked on, and I'm having time on my hands with COVID-19, is I'm writing prolifically and being in a very creative mode relative to what I'm doing for myself and Family Office Association. So what could I do to help the family and the family office, especially during times like COVID-19, when I want to enhance what I do? Besides what I mentioned on the tabletop exercise, Thrive in Crisis, let's build in 3 days, let's create where we could go online over a 2 or 3 day window and let me understand what's going to be important to you by my research, my surveys, my talking with you as both the family and the family office, and then what could I do to bring in a collection of 3 to 5 or 5 to 10. I'm going to keep away from that word experts because I think that could sometimes be a negative, but people that would be very thoughtful, perhaps experienced, and creative. It could be a psychologist, it could be a design thinker out of Stanford, it could be an architect, it could be an amazing attorney, a legal person, someone who's a retired, incredible hedge fund manager that I call in a favor for, but is wonderful on investing. So what could we do to bring, or for me, to bring a dream team to you, the family or the SFO, even virtually, and in relatively a short amount of time, somewhat similar but more comprehensive than the tabletop, and a little bit more broad than what I mentioned in the tabletop exercise earlier, provide real value very, very quickly. I'm telling you, everything is changing. Some things from COVID-19 will be permanent relative to real estate, to enhancements to technology, to education and how that's going to dynamically change with AI and virtual reality. And this young generation coming up, there's a dynamic that's happening, how we learn, how we make decisions. And these are important things to think through for families and SFOs, and henceforth the Thrive in Crisis and becoming more anti-fragile, using Nassim Taleb's wonderful book, which I incredibly recommend. I think I'm able to help relative to my knowledge and my relationships and help families thrive, not only in crisis, but in prosperity, and grow and be beneficial with the generations that follow, which will, of course, be very impactful from a societal perspective. I really don't know any family, we didn't have the time today, but that does not have strong beliefs and has not been active in their philanthropic initiatives, which again are greatly impactful from a societal perspective. I mean, all of this is kind of 360 and holistic.
And what else does the Family Office Association do for families?
Well, I realize that we probably have people listening in who, and probably rightfully so, have never heard of me or my organization. So, hopefully I imparted some good advice, and even this hour and a half was really not enough in terms of what is a family office and how do you become effective and efficient, and what's a virtual family office and how does it interplay with structures and mitigating risk, and how do you solve problems before they happen. I mean, we just kind of touched a little bit on the surface. The deeper dive is that relates now to your question. So when I'm not doing my podcasting or videos, and a podcast is Angelo Robles' Effective Family Office Podcast, I'm the founder and CEO at Family Office Association. We're a global membership organization dedicated to the interest of highly, highly successful families and their single family offices, and selectively, at times, the advisors that would service them. What do? We do a significant amount of original, creative, proprietary content that puts real data, research, thought leadership, and ideas at their fingertips for them, I hope, to at least realize a second set of eyes in how to make decisions are going to be very, very valuable for them. So we do like the intellectual curiosity of it, and we are very, very active from an original content perspective. That probably is still what's most near and dear to my heart. We also host a significant number of events. Now, COVID-19 is making that a little hard. But we've done events with hundreds of people on the water in Santa Monica this past summer with Tony Robbins and Peter Diamandis. I've done private dinners, larger scale events. I've had amazing speakers besides Tony, Ray Dalio, Peter Thiel, Steve Cohen, Andre Agassi, just world leaders, former heads of the CIA, SEAL Team 6 commanders, global political figures. It's been really exciting. I love events. I love to get on stage. I love to interview. I love for my relationships to have what's called collisions, meaning you go there not even knowing potentially who you're going to meet, and you meet something that could be amazing. Whether it's a speaker or a fellow brethren of a family member or SFO. Again, this is a little bit of a closed, private, and siloed community. They need to be a little bit more open. That enhances their knowledge, their best practices, and the opportunities from a variety of perspectives, especially for the families. Now, in lieu of that, and that will come back one day, hopefully sooner rather than later, but I've been hosting daily, online video meetings, usually Zoom, dedicated to my families, doing deep interviews with amazing thought leaders, as well as some peer-to-peer, meaning strictly on video, families only, or SFO executives only, and let's talk about issues that are important to you. So for us, it's incredible content, it's physical events, it's now, and part of this will be a keeper forever, daily online video meetings, which makes it easier for us to have international families that get the benefits of membership in Family Office Association. We also launched an online portal for our families to communicate 24/7 anywhere in the world. We also disseminate some unique and creative content through that. We share our schedule, including our online platform for the upcoming week and who we're interviewing. And that also, the main reason for that is for them to communicate 24/7 anywhere in the world internally with their peers. It's peer-to-peer connectivity around everything, best practices, social, investing, could be a variety of different topics. So that's a little bit about us.
And tell us a little bit more about your master classes. I know you mentioned some of the experts you've had on stage.
Yes. Well, the master classes are somewhat of a result of what's happening now with COVID-19 and me going through a creativity period in terms of designing online educational platforms for my members and perhaps selectively some others, mainly built around the virtual family office, leveraging outsourcing and technology, transforming the family office to become more of the family office of the future, and really built around design, accelerate, and transform with best practices. So there's a couple that we're working on. The virtual family office, the best practices centric one. Likely this will be something that is probably a 2 to 6 hour video series that our relationships, my members, would be able to download. And if they then want to do a live version specific for them, well, that relates a little bit to the tabletop exercise or the dream team concept, Thrive in Crisis, creating, quote unquote, your dream team. So this has been an amazing time for us. I've never been busier. I'm feeling hyper creative. I'm writing and very active on social media like never before. And I'm taking some of my own advice that I gave. Maybe I was getting a little old and staid, and I needed a second set of eyes. I needed a mentor, mentors. I needed to talk to more younger people about coming more digital and reaching more of a global audience. So there's been many challenges during COVID-19, and so many have died, and it's very, very sad. But we could take this time and mourn, or we could turn lemon into lemonade. How could we adapt? We're humans, we adapt, we're able to be creative, and I'm finding this to be an intriguing period for me, and we're still growing. We're keeping most of the families we have as members. We picked up a new member today, this weekend. I got multiple new members over COVID-19, And I think we're actually doing some of the best work that we've ever done before. So it's an exciting time in its own way for me.
And so what's the best way for families, family offices, and advisors to learn more about you and the Family Office Association and become members?
Sure. So again, some people hear about us from a friend or acquaintance, come across our website, one of my articles, or lately my podcast or my YouTube channel or social media. So we've been incredibly active in all of that. Some people reach out through Instagram, Family Office Association. Probably LinkedIn is my biggest platform, both me personally as Angelo J. Robles, I believe, on there, but also my Family Office Association group, which is significant. And very active on Twitter, on YouTube, or simply Family Office, and we're growing that extensively given all the interviews and videos that we're doing, and likely including even this one. But yes, families, single family office executives, and sometimes selectively advisors could learn more about us. Our website is a little dated. I'm actually taking this time to revamp it. By mid to late June, it should be ready, but it's okay now. It simply is our name, Family Office Association. And I could be reached at Angelo at FamilyOfficeAssociation.com. I do have a personal website. It's a little simple, but it kind of gets the job done. It simply is my name, Angelo Robles. So that's AngeloRobles.com. And anyone listening in, feel free to reach out. I'm home lately 24/7. That would be 203-570-2898. But I also do highly recommend the social media platforms that I noted. We're doing really creative and interesting work, including not just in writing, but from video work and others that we're doing. So I think that could also be a good starting point. And if what I said relative to our master classes, to the work that we're doing in my Thrive in Crisis, me creating a single family office dream team of kind of a 2 or 3 day window of these amazing thinkers to come in and help adapt to grow and to become more of a thriving, generationally focused single family office. That's been a great initiative of ours. And I mentioned earlier in the dialogue, and maybe I'll just give a little bit of a recap for it, because I think we might have had a little bit of a glitch during our video, of the tabletop exercise, which if I had to give a 1-minute recap of that, and again, families have to hedge against things that could come out of left field. They have to address problems before they happen. Look at what happened, unfortunately, to Kobe Bryant in the example that I gave with COVID-19 and a principal going on a ventilator. These disasters happen, and the family should really insist that the single family office be as prepared as possible. And the single family office should realize they might be a little siloed. We all could learn from others, mentors, a second set of eyes, and always have a beginner's mindset and get better. So that's an example where mainly me, but sometimes I bring other outside relationships in, and now it's all done virtually online. Let us go through an exercise like that, which is the family office executives. Here's issues the family office could be concerned about, and here's things that we're seeing that could be disastrous to the family. And let's see, through stress testing, through what-if scenarios, what could simply be enhanced. It doesn't mean that what you're doing now is not good. Maybe it could be very good, maybe very good to exceptional, amazing. So I could get better, we could all get better, having a second set of eyes and coming in there in what's known as a tabletop exercise and going through a half day of initiating it and learning on the spot, so it happens really quick, as well as then in 2 weeks, a summary and how to enhance and get better, is only going to be beneficial. I said this earlier, closer to the beginning, I'll say it again. If you're not going to be great as a family and having a single family office, you're not holding it to that standard. And if you're in a single family office as an executive, just to float to get ready for retirement, then this is really bad. A family needs to have a family office to be amazing at what they do for the family, and the executives need to be a beginner's mindset and work to be the best that they could be, which 95% of them that I know are. They want to get better.
Yeah.
They want to learn. They want all these resources. So it's just a matter of helping them and putting it all together. And again, my life 24/7 is the single family office community. I love it. And it's been so kind. I really enjoy the opportunity to be interviewed by you. You're very tough. You ask a lot of questions.
Well, you've got the answers, and you're the best person to answer them.
You're so kind. And it was wonderful to do this interview, and look very much forward to hopefully seeing you one day again soon, Hillary, and certainly engaging in many more thoughtful videos and write-ups in the future. It's always a pleasure.
Yes, it's been my pleasure.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.